A wealthy Arab executive made a terrible mistake, one that would come back to haunt him in the most unexpected way. Years ago, he had an affair with his African maid, but when she got pregnant, he expelled her without a second thought. He never imagined that years later, he would be confronted with a shocking truth that would change his life forever. Stay until the end of this story and prepare to be amazed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The grand chandeliers of Khalil Al-Fayed's penthouse shimmered against the Dubai skyline. He was one of the most powerful executives in the Middle East, a man whose influence extended across oil, finance, and luxury real estate. Everything in his life was controlled, precise, and devoid of emotional entanglements. But there was one secret he never spoke of. 7 years ago, when he was still ascending the corporate ladder, he had a brief but forbidden affair with Amina, a young African maid who worked in his estate. She was kind, hard-working, and had eyes filled with an innocence that softened even the coldest heart. But when she came to him one night, trembling, whispering that she was pregnant, Khalil's world froze. "This cannot be happening," he had said, voice like steel. A child out of wedlock would ruin his reputation, stain his name, and anger his family. His solution? Erase the problem. The very next day, Amina was gone, fired, expelled, and sent away with nothing. Khalil never looked back. For years, he convinced himself that she must have moved on, found another life, maybe even lied about the pregnancy. His world kept turning, and his success skyrocketed. Until now. It started with a simple business meeting in London. Khalil was there to finalize a multi-million-dollar investment, a strategic partnership with one of the fastest-growing tech companies in Africa. But when the CEO's assistant entered the room, Khalil's breath caught in his throat. The young man, tall, dark-skinned, with striking, intelligent eyes, felt familiar in a way that Khalil couldn't explain. And then, the young man spoke. "Good afternoon, Mr. Al-Fayed. My name is Adam Keita." Khalil's blood ran cold. Keita. That was Amina's last name. The resemblance was unmistakable. The sharp features, the same piercing gaze, the silent strength in the way he carried himself. It was impossible. Could this really be his son? Khalil Al-Fayed sat motionless, his fingers tightening around the edge of the polished oak table. The room around him, filled with high-powered executives discussing figures and projections, blurred into irrelevance. Adam Keita. The name alone sent an electric jolt through his body. His gaze locked onto the young man across the table. The resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp cheekbones, the intensity in his eyes, features that Khalil had seen in the mirror every morning. Is this possible? He thought. Could he really be my son? But he shoved the thought away. It was ridiculous. Amina had disappeared years ago. She could have been lying. Maybe she moved on, had a child with another man. And yet, Adam carried himself with confidence and composure, effortlessly navigating the high-stakes conversation in the room. His voice was deep, firm, exuding the kind of presence Khalil himself had mastered over the years. It made his stomach churn. "I need answers." The meeting continued, but Khalil barely heard a word. When it finally ended, the attendees stood, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Adam, too, rose from his chair, adjusting the cuffs of his navy blue suit. Khalil acted instinctively. "Adam, a moment." His voice was measured, but there was an edge of urgency to it. Adam turned, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, Mr. Al-Fayed?" Khalil hesitated. The young man's posture was unreadable, polite but distant, professional yet guarded. "This is insane," Khalil thought. "What am I doing?" But the words left his mouth before he could stop them. "Your last name, Keita. Are you from Mali?" Adam seemed momentarily surprised, but then nodded. "Yes. My mother was Malian." Khalil's chest tightened. He swallowed hard. "And your father?" A flicker of something crossed Adam's face. Something cold. He stood straighter. "I never met him," he said flatly. A sharp, suffocating weight pressed down on Khalil's chest. He clenched his fists at his sides. "He doesn't know." The realization nearly knocked the breath out of him. Before he could say more, another executive approached Adam, clapping him on the shoulder. "Great job in there," the man said, pulling Adam into a side conversation. Khalil stood frozen, watching as the young man turned away, unaware of the storm raging inside him. The past comes back. That night, Khalil couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse, staring at the skyline, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. Memories clawed their way back. The night he sent Amina away, her tear-streaked face, her voice trembling as she pleaded with him. "I have nowhere to go, Khalil." "That's not my problem." His own cold words echoed in his head. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He had buried that part of his past, convinced himself it was nothing. But now, "I need to find her." His mind raced. What happened to Amina? Did she suffer? Did she survive? And most of all, did she ever tell Adam about him? There was only one way to know. Grabbing his phone, he dialed a number, a private investigator he trusted with delicate matters. "I need you to find someone for me. A woman named Amina Keita, last seen in Dubai 7 years ago." There was a pause. Then the investigator responded, "I'll see what I can find." Khalil ended the call, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. For the first time in years, he felt afraid. A shocking discovery. 3 days later, Khalil was in his office when his phone buzzed. It was the investigator. He answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." There was hesitation on the other end. "I did." Khalil sat up, gripping the edge of his desk. "Where is she?" The man exhaled. "She's dead." Khalil's world stopped. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His fingers loosened, the phone nearly slipping from his grasp. "No. That's impossible. She can't be." The investigator continued, his voice grave. "She died 5 years ago. Medical records say it was from illness, but Mr. Al-Fayed, there's something else." Khalil's throat went dry. "What?" The investigator hesitated, then said, "She left behind letters, addressed to her son. In them, she talks about you." Khalil's blood ran cold. His past, the one he had so carefully buried, was about to explode in front of him. And worse, Adam would soon know the truth. Khalil's hands trembled as he ended the call. He leaned back in his chair, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Amina was dead. The words felt unreal, as if spoken in a foreign language his mind refused to comprehend. A part of him had expected to find her alive, maybe even thriving, building a new life after the cruelty he had inflicted on her. Instead, she was gone. And now, the only thing she had left behind were letters. Letters about him. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. His secretary peered in. "Mr. Al-Fayed, Adam Cater is here for a follow-up meeting." Khalil stiffened. Adam, his son. For a brief, reckless moment, he wanted to cancel everything, to send Adam away before the truth caught up with him. But that was cowardice, and Khalil had spent his entire life running from nothing. "Send him in," he said, voice strained. Moments later, Adam stepped inside, confident, composed, the image of a self-made man. Khalil studied him, seeing past the tailored suit and business facade. This was a man who had grown up without him, who had carved his own path, who had been shaped by a mother who loved him enough to fight for him alone. Would he hate me if he knew? Adam took a seat across from him. "Mr. Al-Fayed," he said smoothly, "thank you for meeting me again." Khalil forced himself to nod. "Of course." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. "Say it. Ask him. Tell him who you are." But Khalil couldn't. Instead, he cleared his throat and reached for the contract on his desk. "Let's discuss the terms of our partnership." Adam nodded, professional and detached. He had no idea that the man sitting across from him was the reason his mother had suffered, the reason he had grown up fatherless. The guilt clawed at Khalil's chest. But there was something else, too. A new fear. If Adam read those letters, if he learned the truth from Amina's words instead of from him, it would destroy any chance of redemption. "I need to find those letters before he does." A journey into the past. That night, Khalil boarded a private jet to Mali. He hadn't planned it. The decision had been impulsive, driven by panic and desperation. He needed to see where Amina had spent her final years, needed to know if she ever forgave him. The journey was long, but his mind never stopped racing. By the time he arrived in Bamako, the weight of his past felt suffocating. He followed the investigators' directions, weaving through dusty streets and quiet villages, until he reached a modest house on the outskirts of the city. It was small, but well cared for. A place built with love, not money. A neighbor, an elderly woman with kind eyes, approached as he stood at the gate. "You're looking for Amina?" she asked softly. Khalil swallowed. "Yes." The woman sighed, studying him carefully. "She was a good woman, strong even when she was sick." A lump formed in his throat. "Did she ever mention me?" The woman's expression darkened. She spoke of a man who wronged her, but she did not speak with hate, only sadness. That hurt more than if Amina had cursed his name. The woman motioned for him to follow. She led him inside, into a small, sunlit room. On a wooden shelf, beside a framed photo of Amina and a young Adam, was a stack of old envelopes. Khalil's breath caught. The letters. His hands shook as he reached for them. The truth was waiting. The words he never wanted to read. Back in his hotel, Khalil sat at a desk, staring at the yellowed envelope in his hands. It was addressed to Adam, never meant for him, but he had to know. Slowly, he opened the first letter. "My dearest son, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you, but I need you to know the truth. About me, about your father. I loved a man once. He was powerful, respected. I thought he cared for me, but when I told him I carried his child, he turned me away. I begged, I pleaded, but he was too afraid of what others would think. He chose his reputation over us. I do not want you to grow up hating him. That is not why I write this. I only want you to understand that you were never a mistake. You were never unwanted. I wanted you, Adam. I fought for you. I loved you more than life itself. And maybe, one day, if fate is kind, your father will find the courage to love you too. Khalil's vision blurred. His throat tightened. She had given him a chance. Even after everything, she had given him a way back. But Adam didn't know yet. He hadn't read the letters, which meant Khalil still had a choice. Tell him the truth himself, or let the past do it for him. As he sat there, his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. Adam was calling. Khalil's heart pounded. Did he already know? He hesitated, then answered. Adam? A long pause. Then, in a voice that was no longer polite, no longer distant, Adam said, We need to talk. Now. Khalil Al-Fayed sat motionless, the phone pressed to his ear. We need to talk. Now. Adam's voice was different this time, sharp, unyielding. The polite professionalism from their earlier meetings was gone. Khalil swallowed hard. Where are you? I'm in Dubai. Meet me at the Al-Masari Hotel, penthouse suite. 1 hour. The line went dead. Khalil exhaled, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He knows. There was no other explanation. Adam had discovered something, maybe the letters, maybe the truth from another source. Either way, the confrontation he had feared was here. But fear wasn't something Khalil allowed himself to feel. Not now. Not ever. He rose from his seat, grabbed his coat, and headed straight for the airport. The meeting. By the time Khalil arrived at the Al-Masari Hotel, his heart was hammering inside his chest. He had spent his life walking into high-stakes negotiations, outmaneuvering billionaires, dismantling competitors without blinking. But this was different. This wasn't about money or power. This was about a son who had grown up without a father, because of his choice. The elevator doors slid open to the penthouse level. Khalil stepped into the suite, where Adam stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out over the city. He didn't turn when Khalil entered. Instead, he spoke in a voice cold as steel. So, tell me, Mr. Al-Fayed, when were you going to tell me? Khalil inhaled sharply. No more pretending. How did you find out? He asked carefully. Adam finally turned. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something Khalil couldn't quite name. I always suspected, Adam said. My mother never spoke of you, not directly. But there were moments, times when I'd catch her looking at me, as if I reminded her of something painful. And then, 2 weeks ago, I received a package from Mali, a box of letters. Her letters. Khalil's throat tightened. Then he's read them. Adam let out a short, humorless laugh. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought maybe she was protecting some other man. But then I did what any logical person would do. I ran a DNA test. A heavy silence filled the room. Adam's next words were slow, deliberate. And now I know. You are my father. Khalil closed his eyes briefly. The weight of the moment settled onto his shoulders, heavier than anything he had ever carried. He took a step forward. Adam, Save it. Khalil froze. Adam's jaw clenched, and when he spoke again, his voice shook with restrained anger. You sent my mother away like she was nothing. You didn't care what happened to her. And now, she's dead. Khalil's chest tightened. I didn't know. Adam's eyes flashed. That's the problem, isn't it? You never cared enough to find out. Silence. Khalil had no defense for that, because it was true. Adam took a slow breath, as if trying to calm himself. I don't need your money. I don't need your name. But I needed my mother, and you took her from me. Khalil felt something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine regret. I made a mistake. Adam let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting a meeting. A mistake is signing the wrong contract. What you did was destroy lives. The words cut deep, but Khalil didn't flinch. You have every right to hate me, he said finally. But I need you to know that I'm not the same man I was back then. Adam folded his arms. And why should I believe that? Khalil hesitated. For the first time in his life, he didn't have an answer. The truth was, he hadn't changed. Not really. But he wanted to. I don't expect forgiveness, Khalil admitted, but I want the chance to make things right. Adam studied him for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally he said, We'll see. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Khalil's stomach sank. Where are you going? Adam paused. Then, without looking back, he said, To visit my mother's grave. You should come too, if you have the courage. The door clicked shut behind him. Khalil stood there, staring at the empty space where his son had been. The choice was his. Face his past, or lose Adam forever. Khalil sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The cemetery lay ahead, a quiet, unassuming place on the outskirts of Dubai. The thought of stepping inside, of standing before Amina's grave, made his chest feel like it was caving in. He had spent years pretending she didn't exist. Now, he was about to face the consequences of his choices. Adam was already there. Khalil had seen him when he pulled up. The young man standing still, staring at the headstone, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. Khalil took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. His footsteps felt heavy, like he was walking towards something he couldn't control. As he approached, Adam didn't look at him. He just spoke. Took you long enough. Khalil swallowed. I wasn't sure you wanted me here. Adam scoffed, his eyes never leaving the grave. I don't, but you should be here. Silence stretched between them. Then finally, Khalil looked down at the headstone. Amina, Keita-loving mother, strong woman, gone too soon. The words hit like a punch to the stomach. She had been so young. She should have had so much more life to live. He took a shaky breath. I didn't know she was sick. Adam's expression hardened. Because you never checked. Khalil had no defense. He let the guilt settle over him, suffocating, consuming. I was a coward, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought erasing her from my life would erase the mistake. Adam turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. And was I a mistake too? Khalil flinched. The question cut deeper than any insult ever could. No, he said firmly. You were never a mistake. I was. Adam's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted, less rigid, less closed off. Khalil looked back at the grave, his voice breaking as he spoke. I should have protected you both. The confession hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. For the first time, Adam looked at him. His gaze was piercing, searching. Why are you here, Khalil? Guilt? Regret? Or do you actually care? Khalil met his son's eyes, and for once in his life, he didn't hide behind pride. I don't deserve to call myself your father, but I want to try to be one now, if you'll let me. Adam studied him for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back to the grave. You can't fix the past, he said. But maybe... His voice faltered. Maybe you can try to fix what's left. Khalil's chest tightened. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Hope. Later that evening, Khalil sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the city lights. His mind replayed the moment at the cemetery over and over again. For the first time, he had spoken to his son not as a businessman, but as a man full of flaws and regrets. And Adam hadn't pushed him away completely. His phone buzzed. A message. From Adam. Meet me tomorrow. I have something you need to see. Khalil's pulse quickened. What could Adam possibly want to show him? A test? A final judgment? Or something else entirely? Whatever it was, it would change everything. And Khalil wasn't sure he was ready. Khalil arrived at the restaurant Adam had mentioned in his message. It was a discreet yet elegant place with floor-to-ceiling glass windows offering a breathtaking view of the illuminated city. The atmosphere was quiet, with only a few customers scattered across the dining area. As he stepped inside, he immediately spotted Adam sitting in a corner table, looking at his phone. For a brief moment, Khalil hesitated. He had never feared facing an opponent, a competitor, or even an enemy in business. Yet now, sitting across from his own son, there was an unfamiliar weight pressing down on his chest, an unease he had never known. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and walked toward the table. Adam looked up as he approached but said nothing. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. Khalil sat down, noticing the tension hanging in the air. You came, Adam finally said, placing his phone aside. You called me, Khalil replied, keeping his tone even. A waiter approached, ready to take their orders, but Adam politely declined, signaling that this wasn't a dinner for casual conversation. Khalil took the cue and simply nodded, waiting for his son to speak. Adam exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. I found something, he said, his voice steady, but carrying an edge of restrained emotion. Khalil frowned. What is it? Instead of answering, Adam reached into his bag and pulled out a worn, aged envelope. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward Khalil. It's one of my mother's last letters. She wrote it but never sent it. Khalil's stomach clenched. His fingers hovered over the envelope before finally picking it up. He could feel the weight of it, the history it carried, before he even opened it. With careful hands, he unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. My love for you was real, even if yours never was. The first line alone made his chest tighten. I tried to hate you. I wanted to erase you from my heart as easily as you erased me from your life. But I couldn't, because every time I looked into my son's eyes, I saw you. Khalil's grip on the paper tightened. He swallowed hard and kept reading. You never met him, and I will never understand how you could live with that, how you could pretend we never existed. But I do not write this with anger. I write this with hope. Hope that one day, when you are old and your wealth means nothing, you will think of the child you abandoned, and maybe, just maybe, you will regret it. Khalil closed his eyes for a second, the words slicing through him like a blade. She still hoped, Adam said, watching him carefully. Even after everything, she still believed you might change. Khalil let out a shaky breath and placed the letter back on the table. He looked up at Adam, who was studying him, waiting for a reaction. "You want to know if I regret it?" Khalil asked, his voice quieter than usual. Adam didn't blink. "Do you?" Khalil exhaled sharply. "More than you will ever know." A long silence stretched between them. Khalil had expected Adam to lash out, to accuse him again, to call him a liar, but instead his son simply nodded, as if acknowledging something unspoken. "Good," Adam finally said, "because I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to forgive you." Khalil's chest tightened, but he didn't look away. "But," Adam continued, "I won't walk away. Not yet." Hope flickered in Khalil's chest, fragile, but real. "I can't change the past," Khalil said, his voice steady. "But if you let me, I'd like to be part of your future." Adam studied him for a long time before answering. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something, and for Khalil, that was more than he ever thought he deserved. Khalil sat in his office, staring out at the Dubai skyline, his mind heavy with the weight of the past. The letter from Amina sat on his desk, its words still echoing in his mind. "Hope that one day, when you are old and your wealth means nothing, you will think of the child you abandoned." He had spent years building an empire, accumulating power, ensuring that no one could ever make him feel small. And yet, one letter from a woman he had wronged had shaken him more than any business failure ever could. He reached for his phone, hesitating for only a second before dialing. "Mr. Al-Fayed," his assistant answered. "Cancel my meetings for the next 3 days," Khalil said. There was a pause. "Sir, you heard me." He ended the call before there could be any argument. For years he had prioritized business over everything, including the son he had abandoned. Not this time. The next afternoon, Khalil found himself outside Adam's apartment. He knocked, his pulse steady but his stomach tight. He wasn't used to waiting, but now, waiting was all he could do. The door opened, and Adam stood there, arms crossed, an eyebrow raised. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Khalil met his gaze. "May I come in?" A beat of silence. Then Adam stepped aside. The apartment was minimalist but refined, decorated with taste. Khalil took it all in, the books on the shelves, the photographs on the walls. There were no pictures of him, of course. "You didn't come here just to look at my furniture," Adam said, sitting on the couch. Khalil sat across from him. "I want to know about you, not as a businessman, as a father." Adam let out a short laugh. "A little late for that, don't you think?" "Maybe, but I'm here now." Adam studied him carefully. "Why? Is this about guilt?" Khalil thought for a moment before answering. "Partially, but mostly because I lost the chance to know you once, and I don't want to make that mistake again." Adam leaned back, arms still crossed. He didn't say anything at first, but something in his posture softened just slightly. "I don't know if I trust you," he admitted. Khalil nodded. "I wouldn't trust me either." Another silence stretched between them. Then Adam sighed. "I have a charity event tomorrow. It's for one of my mother's foundations. If you really want to know me, come and see what I do." Khalil straightened slightly. "I'll be there." Adam's lips twitched as if he wanted to smirk but held it back. "We'll see." The next evening, Khalil arrived at the charity gala. It was nothing like the lavish, high society events he was used to. There were no billionaires flaunting their wealth, No business deals being negotiated over glasses of champagne. Instead, the room was filled with real people, donors, volunteers, and those who had benefited from the Foundation's work. And there, at the center of it all, was Adam. Confident, charismatic, respected. Khalil watched as Adam greeted guests, spoke passionately about the cause, and carried himself with a presence that demanded attention, not through power or wealth, but through integrity. He had built something real. A sense of pride stirred in Khalil's chest. Not pride in himself. He had done nothing to deserve that. But pride in Adam. Despite everything, despite growing up without a father, he had become a man of value. As the event went on, Khalil remained mostly in the background, observing. He was a stranger in his own son's world. Then, at one point, Adam approached him. "You stayed." Khalil looked at him. "I said I would." Adam nodded, considering something. "Come with me." He led Khalil to the side of the venue, where a large portrait of Amina hung on the wall. The plaque below it read, "In loving memory of Amina Keita, a mother, a fighter, a light to many." Khalil's breath caught. "She built this foundation to help women like her," Adam said quietly. "Women who were abandoned. Women who had no one to turn to." Khalil's throat tightened. "She was stronger than I ever deserved." "Yes, she was," Adam agreed. Khalil turned to face him fully. "What do you want from me, Adam? Do you want me to donate? Do you want me to stay away? Just tell me, and I'll do it." Adam studied him for a long time before answering. "I don't want your money, Khalil," he said. "I don't even know if I want you in my life. But if you really want to be here, then prove it." Khalil met his gaze and nodded. "I will." Adam gave him a look that was almost amused. "We'll see." And for the first time, Khalil allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance. The next few weeks were unlike anything Khalil had ever experienced. He attended charity meetings, visited shelters, and sat through discussions about funding and logistics. He wasn't just writing checks, he was learning. Adam barely spoke to him during these events, keeping a professional distance, but he noticed. He noticed when Khalil listened instead of dominating conversations. He noticed when Khalil stayed late to help instead of leaving after a brief appearance. One evening, after a long meeting, Adam finally said, "You're still here." Khalil simply nodded. "I told you I would be." For the first time, Adam didn't respond with skepticism. Instead, he simply walked beside him in silence. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. The Foundation's annual gala arrived, a major event celebrating the progress made throughout the year. Adam was at the podium, speaking about his mother's legacy. Khalil sat in the audience, watching with quiet pride. Then, something unexpected happened. As Adam finished his speech, he glanced toward Khalil. A pause, just a flicker of hesitation. Then he gestured toward the table beside him. An open seat. Khalil's breath caught. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He stood, walked to the front, and took his place beside his son. For the first time, Khalil wasn't alone. And for the first time, he believed he never had to be again.